kind of going through a variety of tips, tricks, tactics that I have found to be effective, and how do you pitch an idea, a new venture, an investment opportunity, how do you pitch to customers to acquire them. A little bit of my background and experience. For folks that are just coming in, we can pass around that sign-up sheet, get everyone's name and net ID. A little bit of my background. I started my career at Deloitte Consulting and then got my master's in computer science here at Georgetown, graduated in 2012, and left the corporate world to start my own sunglasses company. So I spent 5 years as a social entrepreneur selling luxury Italian sunglasses and donating 10% of our profits to fund cataract surgeries in the developing world. Through that journey, I participated in a variety of pitch competitions. I pitched different angel groups, individual investors. We raised more than $500,000 to help fund the company from 27 different investors, more than half of whom were Georgetown alums and classmates and colleagues of mine. I spent the past year and a half working at the Halcyon Incubator, which is about 4 blocks away at 34th and Prospect. And it's an incubator program for social entrepreneurs who live and work there for 5 months. And a large part of our curriculum is teaching the entrepreneurs how to pitch, present, and persuade. So over the next 55 minutes or so, we're going to go through some of the best practices. And the first step is to know your audience. And before you're going into any pitch, whether it's a Startup Hoyas Challenge next week, or with a group of investors or a potential client, you want to know who's going to be in the room. You also want to know what are their expectations. If it's an investor pitch, are they expecting to decide whether or not to invest or whether or not to have a next meeting with you? For the Startup Hoyas Challenge pitch next week, we'll get into later on what the exact format is and what you can expect. I also have some handouts for everybody you can pass out. So here is basically a ultimate presentation prep checklist. If you want to just take some of these and pass them around, you can send them that way. It's kind of a simple one-sheet cheat sheet on how to prepare for any presentation. What are some things you want to think about in terms of the materials you have, what message you want to communicate, and then to the audience in the room, how can they help you to accomplish your goals? All right, so I wish this thing would come over a little bit, but we're going to deal with that. There's B's. All of them start with B's because communication is nonverbal. And it's important that you think about, as you're presenting, what is your body saying? Because the visual things you communicate is actually 55% of the information that people absorb. The vocal, the tone, the pitch, am I talking in a high squeaky voice because I'm kind of nervous? Or am I talking in a deep voice because it sounds weird? There's a range there, and you want to vary that range in how you communicate, accenting certain things. When you tend to end something with a question, your voice kind of elevates. When you end something with a period, you're pretty confident. You can get a deeper, stronger tone of voice there. And now at the bottom, the verbal content, what you actually say, is only 7% of what people hear when you're presenting. So it's important to be aware, and I'm going to go through a couple good body language postures. I'm going to try my best to do the things that I'm coaching you to do up here. Feel free to call me out if you think I'm doing a bad job or I slip up a little bit, because I'm always looking on getting better at how I can present. One basic thing you can start with is, so last night was the basketball national championships. When you are presenting, imagine you're holding a basketball right here in your hands. This is a great basic place to put your hands if you don't know what to do with them. It's like when you learned to drive when you were 16, mom and dad was like 10 and 2. Hands on the top of the steering wheel, it's a little awkward. As you get better at driving, you don't actually keep them there. The same is true for holding the basketball. You don't need to have your hands here all the time, but it's a great place to start, and you can kind of gesture in one way or the other. What you don't want to do is you don't want to cross your arms, okay? You don't want to look down at the ground or your feet. You certainly don't want to look back at the slides all the time. Ideally, you have planned and prepared your presentation, so you know what the content is, and it's just supporting what it is you want to articulate. You'll notice I talk with my hands a fair amount, kind of to communicate a point. Some good resting postures I'll throw out there without a clicker is just kind of one arm crossed, just like this. It's respectful, you're listening, you're not, this is kind of more closed off. You can kind of do this or this. Hands in your pockets is okay. I find if you go thumbs up, there's like a little positive vibe I'm giving out right now, or a little hang loose vibe. These things are all good. And it's really preventing the closed off, you're sitting down, crossing your legs, and not being open to feedback or communication or dialogue with the people in the audience. So I want everybody to take Their fingers right now make an OK symbol. Right, everybody's got this. Now I want you to follow what I do. I want you to put it right here on your chin. Oh, I said chin. How many people are touching their chin and how many are touching their cheek? Huh. It's interesting. What I did is what you mirrored, what I told you to do. A couple of people were like, what? What did you just say there? But people tend to do what you are doing, not necessarily what you're saying. So think about how you want to communicate that. Here's some variety of body language images I found online. Most of these are not too good. This one looks pretty good. She's excited. That's kind of bad. This guy right here, he's got a trimmed haircut. Gentlemen, you're clean shaven, or you have a sweet beard when you go on stage. Ladies, do something with your hair. You know, you don't want to be distracting, but you do want to look well put together. Shirts tucked in tend to work. I wear tennis shoes every day because they're comfortable, so I encourage you to wear comfortable footwear, not dress shoes. And then here is a little bit more on the elements of nonverbal communication. Everything from how do you smile, how are you creating some warmth and some comfort that, hey, you know, I want to communicate with you, I want to build a relationship. And relationships with the audience members are based on communication and trust. They want to listen to what you're saying and they want to trust that you are a viable source, that what you're saying is true, that if you say you've done 50 customer interviews, then I'm going to believe that, hey, you went out and did 50 customer interviews to validate the business that you're pitching. Hand movements, eye movements. Try not to blink too much, or like if you get anxious, try to find ways to not be distracting in some of your mannerisms. Every once in a while, a wink if you have a good point can be effective, but don't be winking every slide. That would be a little weird. So of these three postures, maybe you're pointing if there's a moment you want to say, hey, this is really important. We need you now to help us solve this problem and, you know, pick our venture to win the Startup Warriors Challenge because we're going to make a great impact with what we're doing. The crossed arms, no, that's not really an option. Whether the 6 minutes you're presenting and the 5 minutes during Q&A, you want open body language. And this power pose, this is great. This is something you can definitely do. It exudes confidence. It also gives you some brain chemicals that say, hey, I'm kind of like Wonder Woman. I can do pretty much anything. This is awesome. So we're going to transition from body language now to how you tell a story. And the number one goal of telling a story, and this is also my goal in presenting tonight, is that the story leaves the room. If I tell you a story and you don't ever tell anybody else outside of this room about that story, it's a shitty story. It doesn't really matter that I told you. You're not going to tell anybody else about it. And within that story, you want to incorporate the self, us, now framework. Story of self, something about yourself. Everybody who's starting ventures to present the Startup Warriors Challenge, I bet there's a personal reason why you decided to start this. Most of you probably experienced the problem or pain point yourselves, and therefore you create a solution to help you and other people like you. So beginning with that story and your background and what kind of positions you to be working on this project. And then that evolves into a story of us. It's not just about the people up on stage. You want to incorporate everybody in the audience and make them feel like they're a part of the movement, the tribe, the solution that you're putting together. And one of the best examples of this Self, Us, Now framework is Barack Obama. He's given some amazing speeches. The very first one he did at the Democratic National Convention, I think 2004. Was amazing as he talked about himself growing up in Chicago as an African-American male and how his parents fought or grandparents, I guess, fought in one of the civil wars. And, you know, he thinks there's no Black America, there's no white America, there's no Latino America, there's the United States of America. It's a pretty powerful way in which you can bring a group of people together and communicate your vision and get them on board with you. And then now ties into the sense of urgency. There needs to be some time-bound element to what you're working on. For the Startup Warriors Challenge next week, it's, hey, we want to advance to the finals. We want to be one of the top 10 teams presenting on April 24th at Entrepalooza. So let me tell you a story. This past weekend, my sister came down with her 6 kids. We're Irish Catholics. And we went and actually visited the Doritos farm. Has anybody ever been there? It's a cool ranch. I got jokes in here. We're going to have fun. And part of it is, hey, does that joke leave this room? Is that something you want to go and tell people about? And the goal of you telling your story is that it passes the spouse or the roommate test. As you're lying in bed tonight, what are you going to remember, especially if we're one of the judges next week, we hear 10 pitches. Which ones resonate with us? Which ones do we leave that room and go tell our significant other or our college roommates about what the venture is? And not only do we decide to take the story out of that room, but how do we tell it? Because it can be a little confusing and convoluted. If you guys can remember kindergarten, we used to play the telephone game where you kind of whispered in a friend's ears. That is often what storytelling boils down to. If you date back thousands of years to oral tradition before people were writing down stories, you had to be able to communicate it and pass it along to generations. And the same is true with your startup idea. How does that leave the room? How do the judges think, oh, I want to follow up with that student? He or she is pretty early on. I'm not sure they've got it all figured out, but they're onto something, and I'm excited about it, and I want to go home and tell somebody about it, or I want to tell one of my colleagues at work tomorrow about it and see what we can do to help. So you should think about it as you're preparing your presentation. What do you need help with? What are you asking for? And how can you tell a compelling story that will engage the judges to want to help you? So this is a great slide here. It's a little cut off, but the gist of it is it's a summary of a book called Steal Like an Artist. And this slide is in here for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that this presentation is compiled of a variety of presentations that I have stolen a few pages out of. People smarter than me that have presented things I have learned at work and in startup competitions. And as you think about your story, it doesn't need to be a brand new narrative that nobody has ever thought of. It often helps to use metaphors to compare what your business is. We're the Dropbox for something, we're the Uber for whatever it is. It should not define your business. It can certainly help people to understand quickly in one sentence, what is it that you're doing? What's the problem you're solving? What is the business model? How do you charge money from customers or users? If you have a different economic buyer who pays you money than an end user who uses the product or service, how does that factor into it? And an example of this would be if you took the Mona Lisa painting and you painted the exact same painting, that's plagiarism. That's the Mona Lisa, you know that. But if you take the Mona Lisa's nose and somebody else's cheekbones and Dave's nice hairline and you tie them all together, that's a new original painting. And so how can you compile different pieces of different presentations or business ideas and use them to communicate your original idea? Raise your hand if you're familiar with the business model canvas. All right, cool. We got some good hands up. For those of you that are not familiar, this is a very good framework for building a startup and coming up with an idea. There's 9 quadrants in the box. A couple things to note. I will be sending out this presentation to everybody afterwards, so hopefully everyone signs up on the attendance sheet. I'll also send out a link to strategizer.com where you can download this for free. And it's a great way to think through what is your business, who are your, we'll start with what are your value propositions? What is the value you're adding with your products or services? And then what are the customer gains that they're receiving as a result of your product or service? What are the pain points that you're solving? What are the sales channels or distribution channels in which your product gets to market? Is it B2C, business to consumer? Is it B2B, business to business? You're selling some large enterprise options. Is it B2B2C, where you got to set up a business and then you have to make sure they sell through to the end consumer? These are some things that I learned in my sunglasses days. We started as an e-commerce company selling right to you online. Year 3, we grew to sell to surf shops and eye doctors, which was B2B2C, and I realized that I had significantly messed up the 2C part of that. I was able to sell to these wholesale orders, and I'd sell a dozen to 100 pairs of sunglasses. However, there was no training for the employees in the stores. The story about our business, the social mission, the warranty that we provided was never communicated to the 20-year-old store clerk working at the surf shop or the optometrist behind the counter in eye doctor's office. So they weren't able to sell our products to the next step in the supply chain. So as you think about your business and how you're bringing your products or service to market, it's important to factor in who are the channel partners and how do you educate them about your business, about the pain points you're solving, and about why they should purchase it and resell or distribute it to other folks. Cool. This is a 1-sentence pitch template, which takes some inputs from the business model canvas and lets you pretty simply in 1 sentence summarize what it is you do. Our product or service helps this specific customer segment define who it is that's your target user. Is it college students? Is it defense contractors? Is it moms? Is it small businesses? Who wants to? What is the job they want to get done? What job is completed with the help of your product or service? And then what pain points does it reduce? And what gains or positive attributes, features, and benefits does it increase? And then you can also throw in an unlike and a little sentence about who your competitors are, how you're able to differentiate. And I encourage you, as you work on these 6-minute pitches for next week, the input, this whole presentation, everything you're doing, needs to be able to be boiled down into one sentence, just like this. And you can extrapolate on these, and we'll go through what you can put on the slides in order to effectively communicate the different parts of the business, both visually on the screen as well as in your presentation to the judges. So raise your hand if you're familiar with an elevator pitch. Great. Raise your hand if you've ridden in an elevator in the past month. No elevators, really? All right. Well, I respect that. Raise your hand if in the past month you have pitched a business idea or told a joke to random strangers on an elevator. Oh, just him and me. All right. Well, this is something I want you to think about, and it doesn't have to be on an elevator. It can be on the walk to class. It can be standing in line to get lunch at the dining hall. It can be with your roommates and your friends. How do you take 30 seconds to 60 seconds to tell people what you're working on, to try to share your enthusiasm, get them excited about what it is that you're building, and get their feedback? Ideas are a dime a dozen. I see entrepreneurs every once in a while that don't want to share their ideas. They're scared somebody's going to steal them. I guarantee you no one's going to steal your ideas. Nobody cares. And the reason your business will be effective is not because your idea was amazing. That's like 10% of it. 90% of it is the blood, sweat, and tears that you put into the business in building it and going out and acquiring customers and dealing with some heartbreak and setbacks and being resilient. So I encourage you, every opportunity you get, to tell at least one person about what your business idea is. And the more practice reps you get leading up to next week, the more prepared you'll be to present and communicate it on stage. And you'll also realize that it's not that scary. And it's not the end of the world if you mess up or you fumble over a couple lines, or you think, oh, I have to say this sentence exactly as it was. It's already to get a little out of order, or you use a different word here or there. It's not about being perfect. It's about being authentic. And kind of getting the reps in your mind to have a firm understanding about what it is you're doing, what value you're providing, and how you can effectively communicate that in an elevator or in a longer 5-minute meeting or a 20-minute meeting or an hour-long meeting. The goal of any presentation or of any meeting is to get the next meeting. It's for people to have enjoyed this interaction enough to say, hey, you know what, Mike? I like you. Why don't you come by for coffee next week? We'll sit down for 30 minutes and talk more about what you're working on. I'll see how I can help. That is the goal of almost any interaction you have with people about your business, is to further that relationship and to create an opportunity to meet with them again. So I encourage you, when you do your pitches next week, if there are judges that express interest, don't just let it die in that room. Get their contact info during the Q&A and say, hey, can I follow up with you? Would love to get coffee next week. Whether or not you're one of the 10 finalists, it's a real relationship you can build. And Georgetown does a lot of work to bring in smart advisors and mentors who want to listen to the pitches and also want to find ways to help you with your businesses. Ironically, this slide is all cut off, but it's one of the most important content slides that I created. There's something called the 10-20-30 rule. So Guy Kawasaki is a famous marketer, and his rule for any presentation or pitch deck is 10 slides, 20 minutes, 30 size font or bigger. Okay? The key there is that 30 size font or bigger means you can't put 2 paragraphs on a slide. No one's going to read it. It's going to be distracting, and the audience is going to spend the whole time trying to read what that little font says or understand it. The goal of your slides is to support what you're saying. It's not to have a verbatim script of what I'm going to say on the slides back there. I am going to look back to read the asterisks because I want to make sure I get the points right for what it is you're doing next week at the Startup Warriors Challenge. So instead of 10 minutes, you have 6 minutes to present. Sorry, instead of 20 minutes, you have 6 minutes. And instead of 10 slides, I would recommend 3 to 6 slides. And I'll go through what would be good slides in terms of what content you want to present. And for the size of the font, the size 30 font, or the general rule is Who's the oldest person in the room? Divide their age by 2, that's the smallest font. You know, somebody 60 or older, you're sticking with 30, you're just doing it for young kids. Sure, maybe you can get away with some 12 or 16 font, but I would stick to larger font, key messages on the slides, and then work on what it is that you're gonna orally communicate with them in the background. So as you're going through your story, it's important to remember from elementary school, what are the components of a story? Well, you know, there's a setting. Where does it take place? So think about the problem that people experience that you're solving. Where do they experience this problem? Is it at home? Is it at work? Is it in their commute to work? Who are the characters in the story? Are you in the story? Is it a problem that you experienced firsthand and you want to tell about why this was hard? For example, my mom had cataracts, and she was able to get a cataract surgery at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore in about 15 minutes and go home. There are millions of people around the world who suffer from cataracts and don't have access to eye care. So part of the reason that I started Waveborn and I built this company was to provide eye care in the developing world to people like my mother who needed help to be able to see but weren't able to get that. And so along with the characters in the story, there's also some plot elements, some conflict. You know, think about any romantic comedy where the characters meet, the introduction, oh, this is so cute. You know, there's some rising action, usually some comedy, some humor, some things that are going well. And then there's always that like, oh shit moment where things are not going well. You guys all seen Wedding Crashers? This is a great element. Like when he starts hanging out and going to funeral crashing, like that's when you know you've hit a low point in the storyline. It happens to everyone. There's always these setbacks, these things that don't go well. And for people listening to the story, they're like really rooting for the protagonist. They want them to do well. And they need to experience hardship at some point along the journey. You get a little bit more empathy from the audience. They can relate more. And it creates an opportunity for a large climax, a big event. A battle is won. You get to kiss the girl or the boy. And then a little bit of falling action to set up the sequel and the next story you're going to tell, the next meeting with them, as well as overall resolution. So when you're preparing your pitches, think about how you can incorporate all or at least most of these elements in the story that you're going to tell next week at the Startup Warriors Challenge. What color is this cow?
Purple.
Purple. Huh. Do you guys see a lot of purple cows? No. That's the entire point of being a purple cow, is that it's remarkable. It is something worth remarking about. You're driving down a country road and you see cows on cows on cows. They're all black and white. Like, yeah, whatever, I don't really care. Suddenly, your friend's driving. You're like, whoa, a purple cow, what? Everyone turns their head. They want to see what that is. How do you become a purple cow? How do you build a business and a venture that is a purple cow, that is worth remarking about, that is worth telling others about, that is different and unique, and adds value in a way that is perhaps unexpected? All right. I'm going to keep working on some jokes throughout this presentation, and this is a great time. And shout out the answers if you know them. I think people might know the answer to the first question. What do you call a cow with no legs?
Ground beef.
Ground beef. That's good, right? What do you call a cow with 2 legs? Lean beef. So, all right. What if you have a cow? It has all 4 legs, but doesn't have any milk. What do you call a cow with no milk? A milk dud. Last cow joke we got here for a little bit. What do you call a cow right after it gives birth? It's decaffeinated. So this is a little bit hard to read, and this is more dense than most of my other slides, but it's important. And a great segue from cow jokes to what did the old Greek orators and philosophers talk all about? It was logos, which is an appeal to logic, ethos, which is an appeal to ethics, and pathos, which is an appeal to emotion. And when you're telling your story and talking about your business, too many entrepreneurs make the mistake of just being logical. And here's the facts, here's the figures, here's the market, here's what my margin is, here's what we're going to do. And guess what? Human beings are not rational beings. We are irrational, emotional beings. And to get the best responses, you need to tap into some of those emotional thoughts and patterns, and to be able to tell stories that connect with people. So see how this works. So let's say I was to tell you a story about me and my dad and our dog. And my dad and I are walking our dog. And we go about and we do these things. I have a hypothesis that in most of your heads right now, you're not picturing Tom Malloy, my dad. You're actually picturing your dad. And if you had a dog growing up, you're probably picturing that dog. You're not picturing my dog, my Irish Terrier. Is that right? And so it's worth thinking about when you talk about a dad or a sibling or someone close to you, people don't actually picture that person. They picture that person in relationship to themselves. And so a great way to have an emotional appeal is to touch on some emotional heartstrings in terms of your relationships or experiences and to communicate in a way that the audience can get emotionally connected. And one of the best examples I've seen of this in storytelling by entrepreneurs, there was a venture at Halcyon called Storytime. And the CEO was a phenomenal presenter. He get everybody, after every pitch, they wanted to go march in the streets and do whatever they could to help them. And so his business, Storytime, was designed to send text message stories of books to parents of kindergartners and first graders in low-income neighborhoods. They're parents who love their kids, they don't have enough money for, this is pretty good, right? I know. Don't have enough money to buy books. However, everybody's got a phone in their pocket or on the counter right there. And so we said, what if we sell to school districts, we get schools to buy in, and then it's literally like the teacher, like Mrs. K, is sending home text messages once a week to read these stories with your kids. And he'd go through and he'd give his pitch, and it's backed by science. He'd do the logos, Stanford research. He's a Yale guy, yada, yada, yada. It's legit. And he'd talk about Maria. He'd introduce Maria and her son, Chad, at the very beginning and weave them in throughout the story. And then when he got to the end, he would say, think about Maria and think about all the struggles she has working 2 jobs to try to provide for her family. Our mission and our real dream is to provide her with 5 minutes at night when she can forget about the stresses of life and just read to her child and to spend time with her child and to love and learn with her child. That's what we're creating here at Storytime. Like, I got the feeling chemicals. I like the way that can evoke emotion and to help people understand why this is so important. Why are we helping these people? How is it so impactful? You want to incorporate those elements of pathos and ethos into your presentations. Let me go through this real quick. So on the ethos side, you also want to develop some credibility, and that ties into any press articles you have, any existing customers who are using it. If you've done 100 customer interviews and 97 people said, hey, I would buy this product or service, that's getting some credibility in there. On the pathos side, it's stories. It's the highs and the lows. We talked about kind of the narrative arc. How do you incorporate that in there? And I encourage you to test a few different ways of how do you communicate what you're working on, and ask people, hey, did this resonate with you emotionally? It's okay to get emotional in business, in presenting. It's not just a numbers game. At some point in these meetings and presentations, you got to know your numbers. You got to know how big the market is. You got to know exactly what you're charging per unit and how much does it cost you per unit to make it. So what is your gross profit in there? All right, so this is the template presentation that I would recommend for all of you for next week. 6 slides, with the first slide being the problem and the opportunity. This can be a sentence about what the problem is. I highly recommend a graphic, some sort of large image that takes up the whole slide of somebody experiencing this pain. And then the second slide is, what is your value proposition? What is your solution? So you made the audience feel the pain, understand the problem that people are experiencing. Now, how do you solve it? And from there, you want to go into, what is your business model? This is a great time to use an analogy of, we're like Stitch Fix for kids' shoes. How do you compare something so people understand what your business model is? It's okay if it's not fully baked. I think all the judges going into next week know there's varying levels of how early of an idea stage are some of these companies versus those that have an MVP, a minimum viable product that they've been able to get out on the market. I highly encourage all of you to talk about your customer discovery. How many customers have you talked to? This is before you sell to them. It's, did you get out of the building and go talk to 30 or 50 or 100 humans that would potentially use this product or service? And what did they say? Tell me what your hypotheses were before you talked to them, and then tell me what you learned afterwards. Did you validate some of these hypotheses? Did you think one thing and turns out you're completely wrong, and they still want to use it, but for very different reasons than you originally thought. And at this point, it's important to note that you do not want to fall in love with your solution. You want to fall in love with your customers. And you want to find a way to add value to the customers. And what your original version 1.0 solution was, very likely may not be what your business is 6 months later, because the more you get to know your customers, the more you understand what they're struggling with, and then can figure out ways to address those pains and to better communicate how your product or service provides this feature, which means this benefit. And there's a good lesson in there too. You should have a list of features that your product or service has, and then also a list of benefits. And the features should map to benefits. And I'm going to give you a very simple trick in the English language for how to map features to benefits. Which means. Any feature, which means specific benefit. You have a list of features and benefits. Anytime you're talking, you can communicate, we have this feature, for example, with the sunglasses, we have a 365-day warranty, which means if you lose them, if they're broken, or if they're stolen, we'll replace them for free. What? Holy cow, that's amazing. And it's a simple way of communicating the value proposition, the features, which means these benefits. Your competitive analysis slide, this can come in a few different formats. And I have an example presentation. I think we'll get about 5 minutes to go through at the end. There are two most popular ones, or three most popular ones. First is an XY axis. So who are the other logos of other businesses in your space that are doing something similar? Pro tip, if someone asks who are your competitors and you say we have none, done. Everybody has competitors. Everybody is doing something to solve this problem today before you existed. So whether it's different businesses that are doing things in a similar space, or it's the old way of doing things, or it's a very manual process and you're trying to automate it, make sure you understand what are people currently doing to solve this problem. So you've got an X, Y axis. You've also got Venn diagrams. You can do 2, you can do 3. I saw somebody with 4 the other day. What are other businesses doing? Are you in the sweet spot in the middle of it? And then the third format for the competitor analysis slide is you list all the features or the benefits along the side. And then you have your logo, somebody else's, somebody else's, somebody else's. You have green checks and everything. Everybody else has a couple green checks and red X's because they don't do the things that you do. So one of those 3 formats I would recommend as a good format for one of your slides to say, hey, here's who else is in the marketplace, what they're doing, and here's why we're different. Why hasn't this been done before? You should also have a team slide. This is great. People want to get to know you. This can be in spot 5. This can also be in slide 1 or 2, depending on where you want to introduce yourself. And if you have other team members, I definitely recommend you include a headshot of yourself. Any logos you have of other partners, Georgetown University, basically anybody else that you're working with. If you have advisors, if you have professors, if you've met with some of the entrepreneurs and residents, and they've helped you, coach you kind of through your presentation, put them on the team slide and say, this is what our team looks like today. We're constantly growing and looking to, bring on more advisors, people who can help guide us in specific parts of the business. So a pro tip here, if you ask for money, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you get money twice. Ask for advice. Get to know people. Understand their perspective. Be humble. Be gracious. Welcome their feedback. Even if you don't agree with it, you still smile and nod. You just don't actually set up a second meeting with them because you don't like them. But in the room, you want to be respectful to everybody. You appreciate their insights. And a week or 2 weeks later, shoot them a little note and say, hey, thanks for your advice. I actually applied it here, and I made this decision about my business, or I did this thing because what you said to me was valuable. When I get those emails, my heart is full, like all the happy chemicals come down. I'm like, oh my God, I added value to somebody. This is amazing. Yeah, pro tip, you want to build rapport with me, shoot me an email in 2 weeks and be like, hey, your presentation helped a lot. I think I did really well at Startup Voyage Challenge. Like, I would love that. That makes me feel like, hey, the work I did to prepare this, the time to come in here, it has an impact. People want to know they're helping. It really is that simple, and whether or not you want money from people, you want their help. People have time, talent, and treasure. So you start with their time, you get to meet them, you get some of their talent, some of their advice, their expertise, and as you build a relationship, which is based on communication and trust, then you may one day be able to get some treasure, get some money to help you either as a customer or as an investor in your business. Last but not least is the traction you have. Is it, for early stage folks, how many customer interviews have you done? For somebody who has an MVP in the market, what are your sales? How many units? How much revenue have you earned this year or since you started it? Do you have any press mentions? Has anybody written an article in the Hoya or other local press outlets? Do you have X social media following? Did you do an experiment where you A/B tested something and you learned something? People want to see that you're learning. Entrepreneurs do not know the answer to everything. 90% of what we're doing is making shit up as we go along and trying to look confident and smile while we do it, even though we jumped out of an airplane and are trying to build a parachute on the way down. All right? And on this slide, you can include some financial projections. Well, I'll say a few things here. One, they're always made up. Nobody sees a 5-year graph up and to the right and thinks, oh, that's exactly what's going to happen. He's got it figured out. Here's my money. It is valuable to say, hey, I've thought about the next 3 or 5 years. I know this year we're going to be pretty small. We're probably not going to be profitable. But I think we can grow as we learn these things, as we acquire some customers, we take over the DC market or the Georgetown University market, and then we look to grow over time. And most importantly is that word ask. Make sure that you have an ask. Come on in. Welcome. Make sure you have an ask for the audience. Anytime you get the opportunity to stand on stage and present to people, or anytime you get the opportunity to walk to class with somebody and share a story about what you're working on, have an ask. Hey, can you fill out the survey? Hey, can you like my Facebook page? Hey, can you introduce me to 2 friends, who might be interested in a 15-minute chat about what I'm working on? Okay? So what are some questions that judges might ask next week? So some questions might include, who is your customer? How are you going to make money? What's your business model? How much do you charge? What's your COGS? Raise your hand if you know what COGS means. Yeah, cost of goods and services, cost of goods sold, whatever it costs you to make the thing that you're selling. Pro tip, you want to sell it for more than your COGS. I'm going to say that again. You want to sell it for more than your COGS. If it costs you $10 to make a widget, selling it for $8 is pretty bad math. All right, selling a $10 widget for $20, that's pretty good math. You just doubled your money. All right, yeah, question.
How much into detail does this pitch entail in regards to financials and cost of goods sold and whatnot? Is that just meant for the judges' questions afterwards?
That's a great question, and I think it is not a requirement. It's certainly not something that needs to be in it. However, I think showing you have thought through it will add some legitimacy to the pitch. I would encourage you to have an appendix section if that's allowed. And I actually have an appendix here, and I'll show you what's in it. Basically, any slides you made that don't fit into the 5 to 6 slides you want, just put them in the appendix. And then when you have this 5 minutes of Q&A, if somebody asks a question about, well, what's your unit cost? You can be like, oh, let me click to that slide. I have it right there. And the best entrepreneurs that I've seen over the past few years, the ones that have been most successful, always have an appendix. And they have random shit in there that is sometimes weird or a little bit off-brand because it was an old version of something. But it answers questions that people might have. And when somebody in the audience asks you a question and you can click to a slide and say, hey, I've got the answer to it, okay? And this is how you respond to any question that somebody asks you. You smile and you nod and say, yeah, that's a great question. I appreciate you asking that question. And what you're doing, building rapport and buying your brain 5 seconds to think of anything intelligent that you could say next. Okay, this is really important. I've worked with a lot of entrepreneurs, especially at Halcyon, some of whom came in with a thing called resting bitch face. And whoever was talking, they're like, I'm fucking smarter than you. Already tried it, didn't work. Next, I don't want. Nobody wants to work with that entrepreneur. Nobody is jumping for joy to say, hey, let me get that next meeting. Let me make this introduction. You have to be warm and open and welcoming, okay? And smile and be personable and make yourself look like you're somebody who'd be enjoyable to spend 15 to 30 more minutes with. That's what you're hoping for in this first interaction, all right? So Zig Ziglar is a phenomenal guy, and he says, you were born to win, but to be a winner, you must plan to win, you must prepare to win, and then, and only then, can you expect to win, all right? And the way that this breaks down is you should spend 60% of your time planning to win. All right, what you're doing right now, this is planning with a little bit of preparation in it, all right? 30% of your time is preparing, working on the slides, practicing your pitch, with your roommates, with your parents, with your siblings, with friends in the lunch line, all right? And then next Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday, you get the opportunity to show up and expect to win. And to know that your business is further along, you're confident, you've done the market research, you've practiced how you're going to communicate it, and you're going to do really well. And that little quote on the bottom is one of the truest truisms that I live my life by, is that you can get anything you want in life as long as you help enough other people achieve what they want. Okay? Entrepreneurship is not a zero-sum game. What we're doing here at Georgetown is not Pepsi versus Coke. You don't have to have somebody else lose so you can win. The best businesses, the most successful entrepreneurs are the ones that are altruistically trying to help everyone they can along the way. You help people on the way up, so when you see them on the way down, they're putting a hand out instead of a leg out to trip you. All right? This one's simple. Be authentic. Be your best, truest self. If you don't ever wear a shirt and tie or a suit, don't come to this pitch wearing a suit and tie. If you do, you look great. Well, you look great. For some of the undergrads, be yourselves, all right? Startup casual, all right? Maybe tuck in the shirt. Maybe don't have profanity on your t-shirt. You know, but be yourself and tell a real story from your heart. And that will resonate with the audience. They will hear that, and they will lean in to learn more about what you're working on. Oh, this is important. Remember to breathe, okay? And I learned this last night, that excitement turns into fear when you forget to breathe. Shit. The flip side of this is true. When you feel fear, if you do a get it all out, all right? It's like you're blowing out birthday candle cakes. Get a few of these good deep breaths going. A little bit of water if you need it. So now I'm going to teach you one of the best mental ways to refocus and to overcome some fear or some anxiety. Oftentimes, you can feel pressure coming around you. You're nervous. You're anxious. So I'm going to face this way and make it the same direction. We're going to, first of all, all right, let me take a breath. All right, now I want all of you to take one deep breath. We're going to do 4 more. Now for the first breath, I want you to breathe into the front left corner of the room. Now for the second breath, I want you to breathe into the front right corner of the room. Now here's the magical part. You're going to look at me, you're going to use the eyes in the back of your head to breathe into the back left corner of the room. Now you're going to use the eyes in the back of your head to breathe into the back right corner of the room. I guarantee this room is much bigger than it was a minute ago. I guarantee you're calmer, your blood pressure is lower, any anxiety you were feeling has a little bit subsided. Your brain sometimes gets into the one-dimensional mind, the fight or flight. Oh, like I'm in a trash compactor, everything's compressing in. When you take time to breathe into the 4 corners of the room, you make the room bigger. You identify space you have, and quite honestly, no one's coming here with a machete to kill anybody. This has never been a life or death situation, although some people may feel like pitching is a life or death situation. The other thing that's interesting, when you breathe in the 4 corners, you always find an exit. You identify an exit path. If something terrible was to happen, you know there's 2 doors. All right? You know, maybe you go in the back corner and hide under a desk and they'd get someone in the front row. Sorry, you came late. I won't die first. And the other thing that's really valuable about this breathing exercise, you can do it in any room, in any meeting, with very intelligent or very dumb, frustrating, ignorant people. When you don't have an escape and you know you have to sit there for another 30 minutes, just breathe and just find those 4 corners and know that everything's going to be okay. And allow your brain and your body the ability to release some of the stress and move on. Cool? Take that one with you. That's a story you can share people. They might like it along the way. So always have an ask. So, oh my God, that was my first ask. Share these lessons with your friends. Okay? Anything you learned today that's helpful, tell your friends about it. We're going to share this Zoom video. We'll get an email out to everybody. I'll share the slides. I got a couple other resources for you. Step 2 is to explore entrepreneurship. I'm excited to have all sorts of different majors, undergrads, MBAs here in the room tonight. Entrepreneurship is really, really cool. And it's also really, really hard. And so it's a lot easier when you have friends that are doing similar stuff. They're not going to be the same thing. They're going to be your direct competitors. But knowing that there's other people on this campus that are actively stretching outside their comfort zone, that are trying to solve hard problems with unique, creative solutions, it's pretty cool. And if you really want to learn more about it, starting next year, you can get a minor in entrepreneurship, which is pretty cool. All right. And this about wraps up my presentation. And oh, look, an appendix. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to open up for about 5 minutes of Q&A. And then I might click to a couple appendix slides if they're particularly relevant. And then right at 8 o'clock, we're going to have an opportunity for anybody in the audience who wants to spend 5 minutes presenting their idea, or a couple minutes, and we'll open up for some feedback from me and Dave and everybody else in the audience as well. So I'm giving you the 10-minute warning to think about, hey, am I willing to step on stage tonight and share what I'm working on? Okay. So let me do this now and start with a couple questions.
So one of your pieces of advice was don't ask for money, ask for advice. So come next week, how should we ask for advice?
That's a great question. I appreciate you asking it. I think the first way is to ask for advice on hypotheses you have that you haven't solved yet, and things you're trying to figure out, parts of the business model. Is this the right customer segment? Do I need to do it a little differently? Is this the right revenue or business model? I think you can ask for advice there. You want to look relatively confident that, hey, this is what I'm working on. At the same time, you want to be a little vulnerable and be open, and none of you are CEOs of billion-dollar companies, and so saying, hey, we're hoping to do this. In the format for the Startup Warriors Challenge, it's reasonable to say, we want to use the prize money if we were to win to do X, Y, and Z. What the use of funds is. This form is a little different than if you were just pitching to an investor, whereas like the judges aren't the ones giving you the money, it's Jeff and Alyssa. But yeah, I think that's a good way to kind of ask for advice, and what are areas that you're still testing and iterating on. Cool.
Another good ask is for networking opportunities. Because you've got a very well-connected body of folks here with the judging. So if whatever space you're working within, if you need some help with a problem, that's like that. That's a really good one.
Thank you so much for this presentation. I really liked it. You've seen a lot of pitches and you've done a lot of pitches. What's the most common mistake you've seen people make that if only they did this, it would be so much better?
It's staring at the slides, and it's talking to the slides and reading the appendix, or reading that relationships equals communication and trust, instead of relationships are communication and trust. That's the difference. It's when people make the eye contact and engage with the audience. I've tried my best, as I've been going through, to find time when I make an eye contact with everybody to build a little bit of relationship rapport, especially if you only have 3 or 4 judges. You're presenting to them. You're not presenting to the screen. You're not presenting to your teammate. So position your body to kind of angle your feet towards them and try as best you can. It's okay to glance back and like get a refreshment about what's up there, but this is also a pretty relevant thing. It turns out nobody really has it all together, and that everybody has some self-doubt and some anxiety about, their business, their ability to pitch and present. And I want to kind of pump you up and let you know you are not alone. And any of the struggles or challenges you're feeling to get ready for next week, everybody else is as well. Your hair looks great.
In regards to how many people should be standing on the stage at one time, what would you recommend?
How many people are on your team?
4.
Do you think all 4 of them have any valuable things to say?
Well, I mean, we can all say everything, but
Okay. That is a good question. I would think maybe 1 or 2 would give the 6-minute presentation, and then the other 2 would come up during the Q&A and try to also, even if you all know the answer to the question, get the 2 folks who haven't talked yet to have at least 1 talking line in the Q&A, so it makes sense as to why you brought them up. I'll also articulate that if somebody is presenting right here and I'm the team member, this is great. This is bad. Staring at the slides is bad. Crossing your arms is bad. This little hand in the pocket thumbs up thing I saw yesterday and I liked it a lot. And I was like, oh, we can just jack it back. He's like, cool, he likes his friend. All right, that's pretty good. Things like that are good. But you don't want to be distracting. The people that are not talking should not be doing a little 4-step back here. And then you want to be in some ways like deferential, or like I'm very focused on what you're saying and or to the judges. Like that should be where the eye contact and the body language is for people that are not presenting. Does that answer your question?
Could they be like sitting down as well?
Sure.
Okay, that's good.
Dave, you got something?
Yeah, one technique that I don't think you mentioned that works well for me. I have trouble standing in front of a group, and I have trouble with gestures. I practice in front of a mirror, so you see yourself. Very, very, very useful. You'll be shocked at what you see initially, but you can make the adjustments and see what they look like. Very, very useful thing.
So my partner is not a Georgetown student. Is he allowed to participate?
Definitely. I believe the rules are you have to have one person with some Hoyer blood in them, and the rest of the team is cool.
If our presentation's a bit, or the topic of our pitch is a bit more technical, can we just adopt the trust everything I say here, and if you have questions, look at the appendix in terms of keeping it slim?
Yes, and I would put your team slide as the first or second slide to highlight your background or your team's background as why you're so smart and why we should believe everything you say. To have some credibility in there, or an article, or we use Stanford research, we use Georgetown research that has proven X, Y, and Z. But I would not spend the majority of your time in the pitch going through the technical details. That's a little bit too much of the logo side, and honestly, most of the judges probably won't get it. So you can kind of wave your hands and say, I would love to dive deeper into this. During the Q&A side, we have additional slides in the appendix. Yeah, definitely. Definitely. People, again, believe what they see more than what they hear. If there's something people can touch and play with, that's great. If it's a food or a drink, always provide the judges with the food and the drinks. That goes a long way for sure. In my sunglasses days, I almost always had sunglasses that I would let the audience go home with. I think the rules for Star Wars do, they give you a one-page kind of leave behind. Is that true? Does anybody confirm on that?
Sure.
I don't know if that's a thing, but I'll tell you what, if you show up and you have a one sheet of paper that you want to leave with the judges, we'll take it. However, don't give it to them before the presentation. Don't ever give the judges distracting things that they're going to be reading this dense content when they should be listening to your presentation.
My idea was like say if it's an app and you have a visually showing on your presentation or something like that,
Yep.
kind of click through. That's still.
That is good. I would be very wary about having the judges download the app during your pitch.
Oh yeah, no.
But if you have it on your phone, you can kind of show it and then even like kind of walk up to them and let them see what it looks like. Yeah, I think that could be pretty cool.
If you're pitching like more of an idea, like an early stage, and you really don't know a lot of the financials and stuff, should we expect like judges to ask us those questions? And if they do, how do you kind of respond?
Sure, that's a great question. I think being upfront about what stage you're at in the process, and we haven't brought this to market. We're still researching viable business models, and maybe that's also one of the areas you ask for advice. Like, how would you sell this, or how would you market this, and how much do you think would be reasonable to charge, or is it a one-time purchase, or a monthly recurring revenue, something like that. Yeah, so I think judges for the most part will be understanding that not everybody is as far along in terms of the financial side of it, but I would still be prepared to answer a question or two about that. Any other? Yeah.
Like coming up with like a little note card would be the worst thing in the world.
Not at all. This would be the worst thing in the world. I respect and understand people don't have things memorized. What would be a not good thing in the world would be having a full script on the note cards. A lot of people try to memorize a verbatim 6-minute script. That's not gonna fly. That's not authentic. All right. To know what the few points are that you want to cover, and like when you see a slide, cream. Like I know exactly what I'm going to talk about right now. Cash rules everything around. All right. That's the whole point of this slide. To go to the financial slide. I don't need to have a script about all the things about money I want to talk about here, but having a couple points about how Wu-Tang Clan is awesome, how I saw them live at South by Southwest last year, and it blew my mind. These are viable stories you can tell with this slide. That's not the worst thing in the world to have note cards or to have an iPad or a phone with a script. I will say anytime that you have your phone out in a presentation or doing Q&A, communicate what you're using it for. So we don't think you're texting friends. If you're taking notes, like say, hey, I'm really excited for feedback. Is it okay if I take notes on my phone, or is it okay if I, record this so I can listen to it later? it helps other people understand why you're using technology and to not feel like we're getting less of your attention. Does that make sense? Any other questions? All right, so we've got 3 minutes until I'm going to call some folks up here. I wanted to show one example deck. What was it? It's gone, isn't it? All right, well, fuck it, I'm not going to show the example. What I did have here and what I found while I was researching this was, raise your hand if you ever used Dropbox? Dropbox? So they recently had like an IPO, people paying them a bunch of money, invest in the business. I found their 2007 investor pitch deck of when they started. And Jen, I'll share this with you if you want to set it out to folks. It is, I don't know how to fix these things. So I'm just going to do it this old-fashioned way and say, right, this is literally, storage is a mess, this is the problem, and it's a bunch of words. It's 2007, this is the pain, this is what people are doing right now. In a perfect world, they'd be doing this. This is what Dropbox does, our features and benefits. Oh, look, here's a demo, that's helpful. Why now? That's a good answer to, or a good question to answer. Why better? Cool. Oh, look, there's a competitor slide with the green and the red. Where do they screw up? Which means these are things we probably do better. Our advantages. Here's our team. We're pretty smart dudes. This is our business model, freemium, and then selling to small businesses. Platform is our customer acquisition strategy. You can certainly talk about how you plan to acquire customers, or if you have customers, how you did acquire them. And then social proof at the end, they went through Y Combinator, we're number one. That's a pretty straightforward, simple deck. Got a lot more words on it than I would love. However, it communicates everything, and 10 years later, they just had an IPO, so they probably did some things right along the way. Cool. Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Raise your hand if you're interested in giving a pitch now and getting some feedback. We got 1, 2. We're going to get them, too. I'm going to peer pressure them. But yeah, I'm happy to kind of open the stage up and give everybody about 5 minutes or so to share what you're working on. Thank you so much.
Yeah.